Honestly, I thought it was going to be a radiation or health tanking rework, but Digital Extremes managed to sneak in a very welcome change, which is coming on the next big update this October. Damage attenuation is one of those systems in Warframe that most players know exists, but rarely enjoy talking about. It's invisible, it's technical, and it often feels like the game is telling you, nice build, but that's enough. For years, it's been a quiet thorn in the side of anyone who takes pride in theory crafting, or who just enjoys seeing their hard-earned power play out on the battlefield. We've all had that moment where you bring your best gun or your sharpest melee into a big boss fight. You unload with all the mods and buffs stacked up, and then the boss barely flinches. You know your weapon is capable of melting entire rooms of enemies in seconds. But against that one specific target, the damage falls flat. That's attenuation at work. To be fair, the system wasn't born out of malice. Digital Extremes introduced it to prevent bosses from being instantly erased by high-end gear. With the insane scaling Warframe allows, some fights would last less than a second if there was no cap in place. Imagine if Eidolons could be one-shot by the latest Incarnon gun. It would ruin the spectacle, the pacing, and the sense of challenge. The intention is understandable, but in execution, attenuation created more frustration than fun. It often felt like no matter what you did to improve your build, you were smashing your head against a ceiling. And the weirdest part? Sometimes your damage was nerfed not because of what you did, but because of what your teammates were doing. That's just not satisfying in a game built around constant progression. That's why this rework feels like such a breath of fresh air. The biggest change is how attenuation now scales with maximum health. That might sound like a technical adjustment, but the difference in feel is massive. Instead of applying the same flat limit to every big enemy, the system will now open up more space for damage when the enemy itself has more health. This means the stronger the boss, the higher the damage you're allowed to dish out before attenuation kicks in. It turns what was once a rigid wall into more of a sliding door. You can finally feel your builds pushing harder against tougher enemies, and that is the kind of feedback loop that makes players keep grinding. The change to per-player calculations is another game changer. Right now, the system effectively shares one pool of allowable damage across the squad. If someone in your party is blasting away with an overpowered weapon, everyone else's output gets softened to compensate. This leads to situations where your carefully modded weapon feels weaker just because you queued into a squad with a damage powerhouse. It punishes cooperation, which is the exact opposite of what a co-op game should do. By giving every player their own damage calculation, Digital Extremes is removing that unnecessary tension. Now your performance is based on your build and your playstyle, not someone else's. It's liberating. I also love that the team is looking to standardize attenuation across all boss fights. At the moment, every major enemy feels like it's playing by its own secret set of rules. Eidolons have one flavor of attenuation, Kuvalich is another, Sisters of Parvos another, Archons another still. For a veteran player, this creates confusion. For a new player, it's downright overwhelming. The upcoming changes aim to smooth all of that out so you know exactly what to expect when you walk into a fight. That consistency matters, especially for a game with as many moving parts as Warframe. It's one less layer of unnecessary guesswork. Of course, there's a flip side to all of this freedom. If Digital Extremes simply removed the old caps without touching anything else, bosses would fall over too quickly. The fix is to give those enemies more health to balance the new system. That's logical, but it's also a delicate balance to strike. Add too much health and you risk turning fights into long, boring slogs. Add too little, and suddenly the game feels like it's handing out freebies. I think the key here will be tuning. Bosses need to feel like they demand respect, but they also need to die fast enough that your build feels like it's making a difference. I'm optimistic that the devs will find the right spot, but it's something I'll be watching closely when the update lands. The ripple effects of this change will be fascinating. Take Eidolons as an example. For years, these fights have lived on a razor's edge between fun and frustrating. Veteran players either trivialize them or spend endless hours min-maxing their setups to squeeze out a few extra seconds of efficiency. With the new system, the way damage interacts with Eidolon health will feel very different. Your team's builds will matter more, but the fight might also flow in a new rhythm. The same goes for Archons, which are notorious for feeling like bullet sponges. If the new attenuation scaling makes those fights smoother, it could breathe new life into content that has often felt like a chore. Beyond attenuation itself, the dev workshop teased other improvements that make me smile. Archguns are finally getting their own arcane slots, which means more customization and more reasons to dust off those weapons. Abilities that interact weirdly with nullifier bubbles are getting adjusted, which should reduce some of the most annoying gameplay interruptions. Even small things like armor toggle options, more palette slots for favorites, and accessibility fixes show that Digital Extremes is taking the time to polish all the little corners of the game. It's not just about one big system, it's about improving the whole experience. And here's where I get personal. I'm genuinely excited. This is the kind of update that makes me feel heard as a player. For years, the community has been saying that damage attenuation feels bad, and now Digital Extremes isn't just tweaking numbers, they're rethinking the system. That takes effort, and it shows a willingness to keep improving the foundation of the game. When I first read through the workshop, I felt that spark of excitement I remember from the early days, when every update felt like it could change the way I play. That's not something you can fake. I know not everything will be perfect on day one. There will be weird edge cases. There will be builds that suddenly feel too strong and others that feel weaker than expected. There will probably be hot fixes and balance passes in the weeks after launch. But that's part of the life cycle of a live game, and I'd rather see bold changes that need a little fine-tuning than no changes at all. This rework tells me that Digital Extremes is not afraid to touch sacred systems if it means making the game more fun. That's the kind of design philosophy that keeps Warframe alive and thriving. So, my verdict? This is a win. Maybe not a flawless win, maybe not one without risks, but absolutely a step in the right direction. It makes me more eager to farm, more eager to experiment with builds, and more eager to jump into squad fights without worrying about invisible penalties. Warframe has always been a game that rewards creativity and effort, and now, with this rework, that reward loop feels even more intact. I can't wait to dive into the Valis Undermined update and see how all of this plays out in real combat.
I killed him, Lotus.